Imagine a boy growing up in Pretoria in the early 1980s, a place where the streets felt both endless and strangely small. His name was Elon Reeve Musk, born June 28th, 1971, to a South African engineer father and a Canadian model and dietitian mother. The household was uh, complicated, in that polite way people use when they don't want to unpack all the details. What's worth knowing is that in between school days and quiet afternoons, Elon discovered that reality could be bent if you understood how machines worked. He wasn't the sporty type. He wasn't even the popular science fair type. Instead, he was the kid who could disappear for hours into the dusty pages of encyclopedias or into the hypnotic glow of a Commodore VIC 20 computer. The machine was modest, 5 kilobytes of memory, but the possibilities seemed infinite. At 12, Musk sold his first piece of code, a simple space shooter game called Blaster, to a magazine for around $500. A small sum, but enough to teach him that ideas, if packaged correctly, could be traded for real money. It was also around this time that he started reading obsessively. Isaac Asimov's Foundation series wasn't just entertainment, it was a blueprint. It offered him a universe where science, strategy, and sheer will reshape civilizations. It's hard not to see the foreshadowing there. And yet, South Africa in the 80s wasn't exactly the launch pad for an interplanetary career. The political climate was turbulent, the military draft loomed, and Elon, never a fan of wasting time, saw no reason to stick around. At 17, he left for Canada under the excuse of studying at Queen's University in Ontario, but really it was a calculated escape route to the United States. The country he believed was the only place ambitious enough to match his ambitions. From the outside, it might have looked like an overconfident teenager chasing a vague dream. From the inside, it was more like a chess player moving a pawn to the other side of the board, already imagining the checkmate. In the years to come, people would describe Musk in extremes: genius or reckless, visionary or delusional, savior or chaos merchant. But in 1989, stepping off the plane in Canada, he was just a young man who had traded one hemisphere for another, armed with a head full of science fiction, a knack for programming, and the stubborn belief that the sky above him wasn't a limit, but an invitation. If you had crossed paths with Elon Musk in his late teens or early 20s, you might have assumed he was just another ambitious student. The kind who collects too many textbooks, drinks too much coffee, and occasionally stares at the window as if solving a puzzle the rest of the world doesn't even know exists. But underneath the surface, Musk wasn't simply working toward a degree. He was auditioning for a much bigger stage. His academic path didn't exactly follow the straight line that career counselors like to imagine. He began at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, partly to avoid mandatory military service in South Africa, and partly because it was a convenient stepping stone to the United States, the country he believed was the only place big enough, chaotic enough, and ambitious enough to hold his future. After 2 years, he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania. By the time he left, he had not one but two degrees: economics from the Wharton School and physics from the College of Arts and Sciences. Physics would teach him the rules that govern the universe. Economics would teach him how to bill for bending them. It was during this period that Musk's mental blueprint for his future began to solidify. He was no longer just a boy obsessed with gadgets. He was a young man mapping out entire industries in his head. Three in particular kept his attention: energy, the internet, and space. They were, on paper, unrelated. But in Musk's mind, they were interconnected parts of the same long game. A set of levers that, if pulled hard enough, could move civilization itself. Of course, they also happened to be fields with the potential to make a lot of money. That part didn't hurt. Still, even the biggest dreams have to start somewhere, and Musk somewhere was the mid-1990s internet, a world of slow modems, crude websites, and more potential than infrastructure. Along with his brother Kimball, he co-founded Zip2 in 1995. The concept sounds almost trivial today, an online business directory with maps. But in an era when many people were still figuring out what .com meant, it was futuristic. If you wanted to find a restaurant or a shop without a paper map in hand, Zip2 was your shortcut. The early days were a cocktail of ambition and deprivation. The office was not only the company's headquarters, it was Elon's bedroom. He slept on the couch, showered at the local YMCA, and poured nearly every dollar back into the business. Silicon Valley now likes to romanticize this kind of story. The scrappy founder who lives at the office, but back then, it wasn't about branding or proving toughness. It was survival. Musk wasn't trying to look dedicated. He was just broke. The gamble paid off. By 1999, computer giant Compaq saw enough value in Zip2 to buy it for roughly $307 million in cash. Musk's personal share came to around $22 million. For most people in their 20s, that would be the end of the story. Retire early, buy a house on the coast, learn golf. But Musk saw the windfall not as an ending, but as a kind of fuel, the kind you burn to reach orbit. The triangle of industries he had been quietly plotting in his head was still waiting. And now for the first time he had the resources to start playing on a much bigger board. Before the rockets, the cars, the satellites, and the tweets, there was a small office with a big idea. And two brothers trying to make it work before the .com bubble either made them rich or erased them entirely. It was the mid-1990s, and the internet was still a strange, clunky place where web pages loaded line by line, and online business meant you had an email address and maybe a digital brochure. Into this world came Elon Musk, freshly arrived from Canada and the University of Pennsylvania, with just enough tech knowledge and ambition to be dangerous. In 1995, Elon and his younger brother Kimball co-founded Zip2, a company with a name that sounded like a software update and a business plan that, at the time, was quietly revolutionary. Zip2's purpose was simple: help newspapers move into the digital age by providing them with maps, business directories, and navigation software for their websites. Today that sounds almost laughably ordinary, but in 1995, most local newspapers didn't even have a functioning website. Musk and Kimball were offering not just a service, but a survival kit for an industry that had no idea it was already in trouble. They started in a small rented office in Palo Alto, living on little more than takeout and stubbornness. Elon reportedly slept at the office, showering at the local YMCA, partly because it saved money, and partly because time was more valuable than comfort. The brothers pitched Zip2 to newspapers one by one, trying to convince them that the internet was not just a fad, and that mapping technology was worth paying for. Their break came when the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune signed on to use Zip2's platform. Suddenly, the little startup wasn't just another .com hopeful. It was a real player in the digital publishing space. Investors noticed, and so did bigger companies that were starting to wonder if maybe this internet thing wasn't going away after all. By 1999, the internet boom was in full swing, and the search engine Alta Vista, owned by Compaq, decided it needed a boost in local content and mapping capabilities. They came knocking with an offer that was impossible to refuse: $307 million in cash and $34 million in stock options for Zip2. Elon Musk, at just 27 years old, walked away with $22 million from the deal. It was his first big payday, the moment when ambition turned into capital, and capital became the fuel for everything that came after. The sale of Zip2 wasn't just a financial milestone, it was the proof of concept that Musk could build something from nothing and sell it to the highest bidder. And in Silicon Valley, that skill, the ability to turn code into cash, is often the only skill that matters. Musk didn't linger at Compaq to see what became of Zip2. Like many entrepreneurs of the dot-com era, he understood that in tech, the moment you stop building something new, you start becoming irrelevant. So he took his $22 million and did what any rational young millionaire might do. He immediately started another company, this time in the even riskier world of online finance. But that's another chapter. One that would lead to mergers, lawsuits, and the creation of a name everyone now knows: PayPal. Fresh from the sale of Zip2, Elon Musk suddenly found himself in possession of $22 million. It was the kind of money that can make a person slow down, breathe, maybe spend a few months figuring out what to do next. Some might have taken a vacation, bought a sports car, or finally learned how to play the piano they always said they would. Musk did none of those things. He had no interest in slowing down. If anything, he saw this windfall as fuel for the next launch. In 1999, the internet was still a strange and unpolished thing. You could browse pages, send emails, and if you were patient enough, download a grainy image after several minutes. But trust? That was harder to download. People still didn't believe that something as delicate as money could move safely through this untested digital space. To Musk, this skepticism wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity. That same year, he founded X.com, an online financial services company that sounded like it belonged in a futuristic sci-fi novel or on a questionable late-night cable channel. The idea was bold. Create a platform where people could send money instantly, invest, manage their accounts, even take out loans, all from a computer screen. In Musk's mind, this wasn't just a company, it was the beginning of the end for traditional banking as we knew it. X.com grew quickly, partly because the idea was ahead of its time, and partly because Musk wasn't afraid to make audacious bets. But growth did mean stability. The company was a swirling mix of innovation, technical challenges, and corporate disagreements. Musk's leadership style, intense, relentless, and often demanding, inspired loyalty in some and exhaustion in others. Board members debated whether his vision was too big, his pace too fast, and his expectations too unforgiving. The turning point came in 2000 when X.com merged with a company called Confinity. Confinity had developed a deceptively simple product, a way to send money through email. In an era where physical checks still dominated, this was nothing short of revolutionary. That product had a name: PayPal, and it would soon overshadow both parent companies. The merger brought new possibilities but also new tensions. Musk wanted to integrate systems, unify branding, and push forward with his broader vision. Others, including Confinity co-founders Peter Thiel, preferred a more focused approach, concentrating entirely on the payment service that was already gaining traction. These strategic differences simmered quietly at first, until they didn't. In the fall of 2000, Musk took a trip. Depending on who you ask, it was either a routine absence or the perfect moment for a coup. While he was away, the board voted to replace him as CEO with Thiel. The reasons varied depending on the source: leadership style, disagreements over the technology stack, concerns about scaling too quickly. Whatever the justifications, the message was clear. The founder with the grand vision was being sidelined in favor of someone deemed more manageable. Musk stayed on as the largest shareholder, which meant that when PayPal's growth exploded, he still reaped the rewards. In 2002, eBay bought PayPal for $1.5 billion in stock, validating Musk's early gamble on digital payments. His cut, after taxes, was about $175 million. For most people, that would have been the point to buy an island, retire, and maybe send a postcard to their old colleagues saying, Hope you're doing well. But Musk wasn't interested in postcards or islands. He was already looking at his next triangle of impossible goals, the same one he'd been quietly plotting since his university days: the internet, sustainable energy, and space travel. PayPal had made him wealthy. What came next would make him famous. By the early 2000s, Elon Musk had more money than most people could imagine, and more importantly, more ambition than most people could tolerate. The internet had made him rich. Now he wanted something far more complicated: to make space travel affordable. Which is a polite way of saying he wanted to do something that, for decades, had eaten governments alive. The spark came from a growing frustration. Musk believed humanity was stagnating. We had computers in our pockets, cars that could start without keys, and the ability to send cat videos instantly across continents. And yet, space travel was still prohibitively expensive, rare, and almost exclusively the domain of government agencies. To him, that was a problem worth solving. To others, it was a problem better left alone. In 2002, he founded Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, or SpaceX, in El Segundo, California. The initial goal was deceptively modest: build cheaper rockets, but Musk, in classic Musk fashion, immediately raised the stakes. This wouldn't just be about cost, it would be about making humanity a multi-planetary species, which sounds inspiring in a keynote speech, and slightly unhinged in a quarterly budget meeting. The early years were a brutal lesson in humility. SpaceX's first rocket, the Falcon 1, was a small two-stage launch vehicle designed for payloads of a few hundred kilograms. It also had a frustrating tendency to turn itself into a very expensive firework. The first launch in 2006 failed. The second in 2007 failed again. The third in 2008 also failed, this time destroying both the rocket and its payload, a NASA satellite. By this point, SpaceX was on the verge of collapse. Musk had already invested much of his own fortune, and the company had funds for exactly one more launch. If it failed, SpaceX would die. In September 2008, the fourth launch finally succeeded, sending Falcon 1 into orbit and keeping the company alive by the thinnest margin imaginable. Just weeks later, NASA awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract to deliver cargo to the International Space Station, a deal that transformed the company overnight from a struggling startup into a legitimate aerospace contender. From there, the story shifted from survival to dominance. SpaceX developed the Falcon 9, a reusable rocket capable of delivering heavy payloads to orbit and returning to land upright, something most experts had dismissed as impractical or impossible. Watching those first successful landings was like watching a magic trick performed in slow motion. One moment, a blazing column of fire and steel was descending from the sky. The next, it was standing still, balanced delicately on a landing pad. By 2020, SpaceX wasn't just delivering cargo, it was sending astronauts to the ISS, launching thousands of satellites for its Starlink network, and winning contracts that previously went only to aerospace giants like Boeing or Lockheed Martin. Musk's vision for Mars, once dismissed as a marketing stunt, was now backed by hardware, test flights, and a company culture that seemed immune to the fear of failure. Of course, SpaceX still had its explosions. Starship prototypes in Texas frequently ended their test flights in spectacular fireballs. But Musk treated these failures less like disasters and more like progress reports. Each blast was just another step toward the day a rocket might leave Earth and not come back for decades. SpaceX had gone from a billionaire's gamble to one of the most important private companies in aerospace history. It had rewritten the economics of spaceflight, humiliated its skeptics, and, at least in Musk's eyes, brought humanity one step closer to a permanent address on another planet. Whether that planet would be Mars, the moon, or somewhere else, well, that was just a matter of time and engineering. When Elon Musk's name became synonymous with Tesla, many assumed he was the founder. It's a common mistake, one that Musk himself has never been in too much of a hurry to correct. But the truth is a little different. Tesla Motors was born in 2003, the brainchild of two engineers, Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, who believed that the electric car deserved a second chance. For decades, electric vehicles had been treated like awkward experiments, slow, impractical, and in the eyes of most drivers about as stylish as a toaster on wheels. Eberhard and Tarpenning wanted to change that. Musk wanted to change everything. In 2004, Musk stepped in with $6.5 million during Tesla's first major round of investment, instantly becoming its largest shareholder and chairman of the board. His entry wasn't just financial, it was directional. From the moment he sat at the table, Tesla's ambitions became bolder, the timeline shorter, and the stakes much higher. The first project was the Tesla Roadster, a sports car that promised more than 200 miles of range on a single charge and could out-accelerate many gasoline-powered rivals. On paper, it was revolutionary. In reality, it was an obstacle course disguised as a product launch. The Roadster's development was plagued by delays, cost overruns, and engineering headaches. Battery reliability was a constant concern. The powertrain needed redesigning, and the vehicle's final price crept higher and higher. But the car's sleek design, based on the Lotus Elise, gave it an undeniable allure. For the first time, the phrase electric sports car didn't sound like a contradiction. Musk promoted it not as a novelty, but as proof that sustainability could be sexy and fast. By 2008, after years of anticipation and no small amount of chaos, the first Roadsters reached customers. They were quick, quiet, and unlike anything else on the market. But behind the curtain, Tesla was on the brink of financial ruin. The global financial crisis had gutted investor confidence, and the company was running out of cash. Payroll was days away from collapsing. Musk poured $40 million of his own money into the company, a move that risked his entire fortune. The gamble kept Tesla alive. Barely. Around the same time, he took over as CEO, cementing his role as the face of the company. Tesla's next move was critical. The Model S, unveiled in 2012, was a luxury sedan that looked like it belonged on a red carpet. It was fast, outrageously so for its size, and could travel up to 265 miles on a single charge. More importantly, it proved that electric cars could compete directly with high-end gasoline models. The Model S won awards, dominated comparison tests, and left established automakers scrambling. Suddenly, the same industry executives who had once mocked electric cars were announcing their own plans for EVs. The company didn't stop there. The Model X, Tesla's SUV, arrived with flashy falcon wing doors that opened like something out of a sci-fi movie. They were visually stunning and mechanically temperamental. Owners loved the drama, but sometimes discovered that drama was exactly what they got when the doors refused to open in tight spaces. Still, the Model X proved that Tesla could diversify its lineup without sacrificing speed or range. Then came the Model 3, Tesla's attempt to break into the mass market. Launched in 2017, it promised a more affordable price point without losing the brand's performance edge. But ramping up production was a nightmare. Musk famously referred to it as production hell, with assembly lines operating around the clock, sleeping bags on factory floors, and a CEO who sometimes literally camped at the plant. The chaos eventually paid off. The Model 3 became one of the best-selling EVs in history, bringing Tesla's technology to hundreds of thousands of drivers worldwide. Alongside these successes came plenty of controversies. Musk's ambitious timelines often clashed with reality, creating a pattern of missed deadlines that critics used as ammunition. Quality control issues appeared, from panel misalignments to paint inconsistencies. Labor disputes flared. Musk's social media presence, candid, unpredictable, and sometimes combative, could move Tesla's stock price in minutes, for better or worse. But despite the turbulence, Tesla's trajectory was undeniable. By the early 2000s and 20s, the company had become the most valuable automaker in the world by market capitalization, surpassing giants like Toyota and Volkswagen. And Musk insisted that Tesla was more than a car company. In his mind, it was an energy company, one building a future powered not by oil, but by the sun, the wind, and giant batteries. Tesla's ventures into solar panels, home energy storage, and grid-scale battery systems reinforced that vision. For over a century, gasoline had ruled the road. By the time Tesla was done, it had forced the world's largest automakers into a race they had spent decades avoiding. Musk hadn't just made electric cars desirable, he had made them inevitable. By the mid-2000s, Elon Musk's life already looked like a juggling act, performed without a safety net. SpaceX was burning through rockets and cash in its quest to prove that private companies could reach orbit. Tesla was clawing its way toward delivering its first electric cars. And yet, Musk seemed to think that he wasn't doing enough to change the world, because in his mind, the equation for a sustainable future had a missing variable. Electric cars were only part of the story. They were silent, fast, and free of tailpipe emissions, but if the electricity charging them came from coal-fired power plants, they were only half as green as advertised. The real prize wasn't just replacing gasoline with batteries, it was replacing the source of the electricity itself. The answer for Musk was obvious: the sun. After all, it beams more energy onto Earth in an hour than humanity uses in a year. Most of it goes to waste, or worse, to heating parking lots. Musk imagined a world where every home could harness a fraction of that energy, store it, and use it as needed, cutting both utility bills and dependence on fossil fuels. Enter Solar City. Founded in 2006 by Musk's cousins Lyndon and Peter Reeve, the company aimed to make solar power mainstream, practical, and, in theory, stylish. Musk came aboard as chairman and primary investor, lending not just money but the weight of his growing reputation as a man who didn't think too big was a real thing. From the beginning, Solar City wasn't trying to be a boutique installer for wealthy environmentalists. It wanted to be the national leader, the McDonald's of solar panels, everywhere, in every neighborhood, at a price people could justify. The company's secret weapon wasn't a new kind of panel, but a new kind of business model. Instead of asking homeowners to pay tens of thousands of dollars up front, Solar City offered leases and power purchase agreements. Customers could have panels installed for little or no initial cost, and simply pay a monthly fee, ideally less than their old electric bill. It was the solar equivalent of Arndem, no money down, drive away today, and it worked. By 2013, Solar City was the largest residential solar installer in the United States, growing faster than many traditional energy companies had ever imagined possible. But solar is not a frictionless industry. For every sunny marketing photo of a rooftop installation, there was a balance sheet groaning under the weight of debt, subsidies, and the ticking clock of state and federal tax incentives. Critics argued that Solar City's growth relied too heavily on favorable government policies, and that without them, the economics would crumble. Others questioned the company's accounting practices, suggesting that its reported growth masked deeper structural weaknesses. Musk, as always, framed the issue differently. Short-term numbers didn't matter as much as long-term inevitability. Solar, he argued, wasn't a trend. It was the only logical endpoint for the energy industry. And if you believe that, then surviving until the economics caught up with the vision was just part of the job. By 2016, however, Solar City's momentum had slowed. Growth was flattening, cash was draining, and competition was heating up. That year, Musk proposed a bold and controversial solution: merge Solar City with Tesla. Officially, it was about creating a seamless clean energy ecosystem. Tesla would make the cars, store the energy in power walls, and generate it with Solar City panels and a new product called the Solar Roof. It was the complete sustainable lifestyle package. Unofficially, critics called it a bailout, a way to rescue a struggling company in which Musk was deeply invested, financially and personally. The $2.6 billion all-stock deal drew lawsuits and accusations of conflict of interest. Musk dismissed the criticism and went ahead with the merger. Solar City was absorbed into Tesla Energy, and the Solar Roof became the headline product. The idea was clever. Solar panels that didn't look like solar panels, but rather like ordinary and very attractive roof tiles. In the glossy product unveil, they gleamed under stage lights, promising to make clean energy invisible and desirable. Reality, as usual, was less cinematic. Producing the solar roof at scale proved far more difficult than anticipated. Installation backlogs grew, costs ran higher than initial estimates, and some customers who signed up early waited years before seeing any tiles on their homes. The product evolved slowly, its ambitions colliding with the complex, unglamorous realities of roofing, permitting, and supply chains. Still, Tesla Energy pressed forward. Alongside the solar roof, the Powerwall became a key part of the strategy, a sleek home battery system that could store excess solar energy for use at night or during power outages. In theory, a household could run almost entirely on self-generated electricity. In practice, it depended on the climate, local regulations, and, unsurprisingly, the customer's willingness to invest in the full system. Even with uneven growth, the integration of solar, storage, and electric vehicles under the Tesla umbrella created something few competitors could match: a unified brand for the renewable energy lifestyle. In Musk's mind, this was the point. He wasn't just selling hardware, he was selling an idea that a home, a car, and even a person's daily routines could be woven into a single, clean energy system. To supporters, it was visionary. To skeptics, it was another Musk overreach. The stretching of a CEO already running too many empires. But whether you loved or hated the idea, it had a certain gravitational pull. Musk's bet was that once you believed your home could power itself, you'd never want to go back. And if the future really belonged to the sun, Musk was positioning himself to make sure you paid him for the sunshine. By 2013, Elon Musk already had a full collection of high-stakes ventures in motion. Rockets trying to make orbit without exploding, electric cars attempting to survive production hell, and solar panels waiting for the economics to catch up with a vision. But in Musk's mental architecture, there is no such thing as enough when it comes to world-changing projects. So in the middle of all the chaos, he decided to throw another idea into the mix. It started with his dissatisfaction over transportation, specifically California's high-speed rail project. Musk looked at the proposed $68 billion plan, which aimed to connect Los Angeles and San Francisco in just under 3 hours, and concluded it was too slow, too expensive, and frankly, too boring. If there was going to be a revolution in mass transit, it shouldn't crawl along at the pace of a European commuter train. It should feel like stepping into the future. His answer was the Hyperloop, a concept that sounded like it had been smuggled out of a 1970s science fiction paperback and given a Silicon Valley polish. In essence, it was a transportation system in which passenger pods would travel through sealed, low-pressure tubes at speeds approaching 700 miles per hour, propelled by linear induction motors and air compressors. The physics wasn't impossible. The logistics, however, were another matter entirely. In August 2013, Musk published a 57-page white paper titled Hyperloop Alpha, laying out his vision. It described a route between Los Angeles and San Francisco that would take about 35 minutes, cutting through California's landscape in sleek tubes elevated on pylons. He claimed the system could be built for around $6 billion, a fraction of the rail project's cost, and would be immune to weather delays, collisions, and the misery of airport security lines. But Musk didn't commit to building it himself. Instead, he offered it as open source, inviting engineers, entrepreneurs, and anyone with the skill and stamina to try. To some, it was a genuine act of sharing. To others, it looked suspiciously like a way to undermine the state's rail project while avoiding the burden of actually delivering an alternative. Almost immediately, the idea spawned startups with names like Hyperloop Transportation Technologies and Virgin Hyperloop One, each promising test tracks, working prototypes, and a transportation revolution. Musk's own companies mostly stayed on the sidelines, except for SpaceX's Hyperloop Pod competition launched in 2015, which invited university teams and independent engineers to design and race small-scale pods on a 1.6-kilometer test track in Hawthorne, California. The competition produced some impressive technical feats, student-built pods breaking speed records, but it was still a long way from carrying paying passengers across hundreds of miles. As the years went on, the hurdles became clearer. Maintaining near vacuum conditions in miles-long tubes was technically possible, but ruinously expensive. Land acquisition, environmental reviews, and local politics made even laying the first segment of track a bureaucratic nightmare. Passenger safety at supersonic speeds inside a confined tube raised questions no marketing video could answer. Musk's interest in tunneling, ostensibly for the Hyperloop, led to the creation of the Boring Company in 2016. Publicly, it was about building underground tunnels to ease urban traffic congestion. Privately, it kept the Hyperloop's spirit alive by developing technology that could, in theory, also house low-pressure tubes. In practice, the company's early projects were far simpler. Narrow tunnels for electric cars in Las Vegas, and conceptual designs for other cities. The full-scale Hyperloop remained as ever, just over the horizon to critics. The Hyperloop became a textbook example of vaporware, a dazzling concept that shifts the conversation without delivering the promised transformation. To supporters, it was exactly the kind of provocation that Musk excels at, throwing a bold, improbable vision into the world to force the industry to think differently, even if he never personally builds it. Whether it ends up as a functioning transit network or just a brilliant footnote in transportation history, the Hyperloop has already done something important. It has reminded people that even in an age where the future often arrives in the form of a phone update, there's still room to dream about moving humans at airline speeds without leaving the ground. And in Musk's world, sometimes planting the idea is as much the mission as executing it, especially when the idea keeps his name at the center of the conversation. By the time 2022 rolled around, Elon Musk had already built a reputation as a man who could, depending on who you asked, save humanity or set it on fire, possibly both before lunch. He had disrupted industries that were thought immune to disruption, launched rockets that returned to land like science fiction made real, and sold cars that made the internal combustion engine look like a stubborn relic from another century. But in all his ventures, there was something missing, a seat at the head table of the world's digital conversation. That conversation, for better or worse, was happening on Twitter, a platform known for its addictive brevity, cultural influence, and uncanny ability to turn minor disagreements into global debates. Musk had been one of its most notorious residents for years, tweeting product announcements, political jabs, memes, and the occasional offhand comment capable of moving stock markets in minutes. For him, Twitter wasn't just a website, it was an arena. In April 2022, the first hint that something was about to change came quietly, in the form of an SEC filing. Musk had purchased a 9.2% stake in Twitter, instantly making him the largest individual shareholder. The board quickly invited him to join. He accepted, and then, just as quickly, declined. Musk doesn't like to play supporting roles. Days later, he made an audacious offer: buy the entire company for roughly $44 billion, taking it private. At first, the move seemed like one of Musk's unpredictable provocations, the sort of headline you read twice to make sure it's not from a parody account. Twitter's leadership resisted, deploying a poison pill strategy to make the takeover more difficult. Musk pressed on, arguing that the platform needed radical change to protect free speech, or at least his definition of it. And then, in a twist that would become part of the acquisition's drama, Musk tried to walk away, citing concerns over fake accounts and bot activity. The fight moved to court. Depositions loomed. Twitter's lawyer prepared to force Musk to complete the deal he had initiated. Finally, in October 2022, the standoff ended. Musk closed the purchase, walked into Twitter's San Francisco headquarters carrying a literal porcelain sink, and tweeted, "Let that sink in." It was a dad joke on a multi-billion-dollar scale, and a signal that the Musk era at Twitter had officially begun. What followed was nothing short of a corporate earthquake. Musk fired the CEO, the CFO, the head of legal, and a long list of other executives. Layoffs swept through the company, cutting thousands of employees in a matter of weeks. Departments were dissolved, projects axed, and the platform's internal culture, once infamous for its cautious, sometimes bureaucratic decision-making, shifted overnight to something leaner, faster, and according to some, dangerously improvisational. One of Musk's most controversial changes came with the verification system. The once coveted blue check mark, a symbol of authenticity for public figures, journalists, and brands, was turned into a paid subscription feature. Almost immediately, impersonation accounts flourished. Some were harmless pranks, others triggered real-world consequences, like the fake pharmaceutical company tweet announcing free insulin, which briefly sent the company's stock tumbling. Advertisers, worried about brand safety, began to pull back their spending. And yet, the platform's user activity surged. People left in protest, others arrived out of curiosity, and many simply stayed to watch the chaos. Musk leaned into his role as the site's most visible user, personally announcing new features, reversing policies, and polling followers on major decisions, sometimes making changes within hours based on the results. Then came July 2023, when Musk unveiled the most visible transformation yet. Twitter would no longer be Twitter. The familiar bluebird was gone, replaced by a stark minimalist X. Musk explained that this wasn't just a rebrand, it was the first step toward creating an everything app, inspired by China's WeChat. A single platform for messaging, payments, shopping, media, and more. Headquarters signage was removed, the bird disappeared from mobile apps. For a while, people awkwardly referred to it as Twitter Now X, before eventually settling into the habit of just calling it X. The rebrand divided opinion. Supporters praised the ambition and argued that Twitter, as it was, had stagnated for years. Critics called it the destruction of one of the internet's most recognizable brands. an unnecessary gamble on a concept that had failed in other markets. Financial analysts warned that the $44 billion price tag, much of it financed with loans, was a heavy burden for a platform whose ad revenue had already been shrinking. For Musk, it seemed less about nostalgia and more about ownership. Twitter had been a place where he played. X was something he had built, or at least remade in his image. Whether the gamble would lead to a profitable super app or become a case study in overreaching remains uncertain. What is certain is that Musk had once again inserted himself into the center of a global conversation, not as a guest, but as the host, and one willing to rearrange the furniture, repaint the walls, and rename the house on his first week in charge. In the Musk playbook, that's not chaos. That's just day one. By the late 2000s and 10s, Elon Musk had already placed his fingerprints on industries that were supposed to be untouchable. He'd pushed private rockets into orbit, made electric cars aspirational, and convinced at least some people that tunneling under cities could fix traffic. But as far as Musk was concerned, these were all warm-up acts. The real challenge, the one that seemed to straddle the line between science fiction and science warning label, was to build a direct bridge between the human brain and machines. In 2016, Musk quietly co-founded Neuralink, a neurotechnology company with a mission statement that felt equal parts visionary and unsettling, to develop high-bandwidth brain-computer interfaces capable of restoring neurological function, treating severe medical conditions, and, in the long run, allowing humans to merge with artificial intelligence. His reasoning was characteristically blunt. If AI was going to surpass human intelligence, then humans would need to upgrade to keep up. The technology Neuralink set out to build was conceptually simple, mechanically complex, and biologically daunting. Imagine a device the size of a coin, surgically implanted into the skull, with ultra-thin polymer threads, each thinner than a human hair, inserted directly into brain tissue. These threads would pick up neural signals, transmit them wirelessly to a computer, and, in theory, allow both reading and writing of information to and from the brain, not just detecting intention, but potentially creating it. Early on, Musk was careful to emphasize the medical potential. In presentations, Neuralink engineers described restoring movement to paralyzed patients, giving speech to those unable to talk, or even restoring vision to the blind by bypassing damaged optic nerves. These were goals with deep humanitarian appeal, and they gave the project a moral shield against the inevitable unease that comes with the phrase, wires inside brains. Still, from the outset, Musk also spoke openly about possibilities that belonged more to speculative fiction than medical necessity. He mused about telepathic communication, saving and replaying memories, and even symbiotic integration with AI. In his telling, this wasn't just therapy for damaged brains, it was enhancement for healthy ones. In other words, not just curing disease, but upgrading humanity. The company's public demonstrations blurred the line between scientific proof and tech showmanship. In 2020, Neuralink introduced Gertrude, a pig with an implant that streamed real-time neural activity from her snout as she rooted around in hay. The presentation mixed neuroscience jargon with Musk's casual delivery, making the idea of a computer-equipped farm animal sound almost routine. A year later, the company upped the ante with Padger, a macaque monkey who used a Neuralink implant to play the video game Pong. Not with a joystick, but with his thoughts. The sight of a monkey controlling pixels on a screen with neural impulses was undeniably impressive. It was also the kind of image that sticks in the mind, and in headlines. Behind the curtain, Neuralink's engineers worked on perhaps the least glamorous but most essential part of the project, a surgical robot. Human hands, no matter how skilled, cannot reliably insert threads that are both thinner and more flexible than a hair into the delicate, gelatinous landscape of a living brain without causing damage. Neuralink's custom robot, guided by imaging and precision mechanics, was designed to do just that, one thread at a time, avoiding blood vessels along the way. The procedure, if perfected, could take under an hour, with the patient discharged the same day. But no matter how sleek the demonstrations, Neuralink faced serious hurdles. Implants in the brain have to survive a hostile environment, moisture, immune responses, and the gradual breakdown of materials for years at a time. They have to remain stable even as the brain subtly shifts inside the skull. And then there's the issue of upgrading. Would patients need repeat surgeries every few years? Would the risk of infection or scar tissue grow with each replacement? These were questions that, at least publicly, remained unanswered. Ethical concerns followed close behind. Invasive neurosurgery is not a casual choice, and the bar for safety is higher than for almost any other medical procedure. Neuralink's animal testing drew particular scrutiny. Reports emerged alleging that a significant number of test animals had been euthanized due to complications or device failures. In 2022, the company faced a federal investigation into its research practices. Neuralink defended itself, arguing that such testing was necessary to develop a safe device for humans, and that all work was conducted under proper oversight. Then in 2023, Neuralink announced a milestone: FDA approval to begin human clinical trials. For Musk, this was a validation that the project was moving from theory to application. For regulators and observers, it marked the start of an entirely new set of questions. Who would volunteer to be among the first human test subjects? What conditions would qualify for early trials? And perhaps uncomfortably, what would Neuralink learn from them that could be applied to the enhancement, not just the restoration, of human capability? Neuralink now stands as one of Musk's most ambitious and controversial ventures. It straddles the line between medical device and philosophical experiment, between the dream of restoring lost abilities and the fear of rewriting what it means to be human. Whether it will one day allow paralyzed patients to walk, let people text without moving their fingers, or store memories like files in a hard drive remains uncertain. What is certain is that Musk has once again aimed for a target most people didn't think needed hitting, and made the world pay attention anyway. After all, putting people on Mars is one thing, putting computers in their heads is another. And Elon Musk seems equally comfortable attempting both. When most people think of Elon Musk's companies, they picture things that move: cars on highways, rockets in the sky, drills underground. Starlink, on the other hand, is a project where most of the action happens hundreds of kilometers above our heads, quietly, invisibly, and in numbers that are starting to make astronomers nervous. The idea behind Starlink was deceptively simple: cover the entire globe with high-speed internet using thousands of small satellites in low Earth orbit. Not a handful of satellites the size of buses, like traditional telecom operators, but a swarm of mass-produced spacecraft, compact, relatively cheap, and launched in batches aboard SpaceX rockets. If it worked, a remote cabin in Alaska could have the same internet speed as a penthouse in Manhattan, and underserved regions could leapfrog traditional infrastructure entirely. For Musk, the pitch was straightforward. You can't have a Mars colony without robust communication, he once remarked. And you can't get robust communication without a reliable satellite system. He added, communication on Earth if half the planet is offline. Starlink was both a business and a dress rehearsal for interplanetary networking. The first test satellites launched in 2018, and by 2019, operational deployments were underway. SpaceX began sending up 60 satellites at a time aboard Falcon 9 rockets, each launch adding a fresh layer to the growing orbital constellation. The scale was unprecedented. Traditional satellite internet providers might operate a few dozen satellites. Musk's plan called for tens of thousands. By 2023, Starlink had already passed 4,000 operational satellites in orbit, with approval from the FCC for over 12,000 and an application for as many as 42,000. A number so large it sounded less like a business plan and more like a hostile takeover of low Earth orbit. The service itself rolled out in beta in late 2020 under the cheeky name Better Than Nothing Beta, which, for rural users long accustomed to crawling speeds and unreliable connections, turned out to be accurate marketing. Early adopters reported download speeds in the 50 to 150 megabits per second range, with latency low enough for video calls and online gaming, a revelation for people used to watching a single image load line by line. But Starlink's rapid growth came with growing pains. Satellite visibility in the night sky sparked protests from astronomers who warned that the bright trains of Starlink satellites would interfere with telescopes and disrupt long exposure images of the cosmos. SpaceX responded by experimenting with darker coatings and sunshades to reduce reflectivity, but critics argued that no amount of dimming could offset the sheer number of objects Musk planned to launch. There were also geopolitical wrinkles. Starlink's promise of Internet Anywhere meant it could operate in countries where governments traditionally controlled online access. An appealing prospect for dissidents, but a nightmare for regimes that prefer their internet with a strong firewall. In 2022, during the war in Ukraine, Starlink terminals were shipped to provide communications for both civilians and military forces, making the service part of an active geopolitical conflict. Musk, who found himself suddenly in the role of ad hoc internet czar, publicly debated the limits of his involvement and even cut off certain services in conflict zones, citing escalation risks. From a business perspective, Starlink was also unusual. Satellite internet is notoriously expensive to deploy, and while SpaceX could reduce launch costs dramatically by using its own reusable rockets, the capital investment was still massive. Musk admitted openly that Starlink's profitability was far from guaranteed, calling it a game of very thin margins. Yet, if it succeeded, it could generate billions annually, funding not just itself but SpaceX's bigger ambitions, including the Mars program. By the early 2000s and 20s, Starlink had moved beyond the beta phase, with service available in dozens of countries, and expanding into mobile platforms, maritime connections, and even airline partnerships. Cruise ships, airplanes, and RVs began advertising Starlink service as a premium perk. In Musk's vision, the network would be everywhere. Not just an ISP, but the backbone of global connectivity. Critics point out that everywhere also means everywhere visible, and the idea of tens of thousands of satellites crisscrossing the sky indefinitely raises serious questions about orbital congestion and space debris. Musk insists the satellites are designed to deorbit safely at the end of their service life, but with so many in play, the margin for error is thin. Whether Starlink becomes the world's dominant internet provider or ends up as an expensive experiment, it has already changed the conversation about how we connect the planet. And in classic Musk fashion, it has also changed the view, literally, for anyone looking up at the stars. By 2025, Elon Musk had already inserted himself into industries where private entrepreneurs were usually treated as trespassers: aerospace, automotive manufacturing, telecommunications. But then came an entirely different kind of arena: the US federal government. And unlike rockets or cars, this one didn't require engineering diagrams so much as political gravity. That year, under the administration of President Donald Trump, a new entity was announced: the Department of Government Efficiency, quickly nicknamed DOGE. A name that sounded half like a bureaucratic office and half like a meme stock. Officially, Doge was a temporary organization, authorized to operate until July 4th, 2026, with a mission as bold as it was vague: cut waste, improve productivity, and modernize federal operations. In practice, it became a high-profile experiment in whether Silicon Valley's pace and mindset could be dropped into the machinery of Washington without causing it to seize up entirely. Musk was tapped as Doge's public face and unofficial leader. His title was not secretary or director, but special government employee, a role that sounded intentionally noncommittal, perhaps so that when things got messy, no one could claim he was officially in charge. His task: assemble teams, deploy them into federal agencies, and find ways to save taxpayers' money. The rhetoric was pure efficiency gospel: eliminate redundant programs, slash unnecessary contracts, and shrink bureaucratic overhead. The early numbers, according to Doge's own website, were astonishing. Claims of $170 billion in savings. But independent audits quickly raised eyebrows. Many of these savings appeared to be rebranded cuts that were already planned, cost shifts between agencies, or optimistic projections rather than hard cash in hand. Musk's approach was characteristically aggressive. Reports described Doge teams moving rapidly through agencies, recommending sweeping changes, and in some cases, mass layoffs. By some estimates, over 260,000 federal employees were dismissed or reassigned during Doge's first months, a downsizing that thrilled budget hawks and alarmed unions, service recipients, and even some members of Congress. Entire offices, including the U.S. Agency for International Development (USAID), saw their operations gutted or folded into other departments. Not all of the changes were structural. Some were cultural experiments that felt more like corporate exercises transplanted into government. One of Musk's most infamous initiatives was the Five Things program, which required federal employees to email a weekly list of their top 5 accomplishments. The intent, Musk said, was to keep everyone focused on measurable output. In practice, it was widely mocked, often gamed, and ultimately scrapped in August 2025, after complaints from employees and managers alike that it was a time-consuming distraction. The critics were relentless. Policy analysts warned that the rapid cuts could lead to reduced service quality, especially in critical areas like veterans' health care, IRS operations, and Social Security processing. Legal scholars questioned whether some of Doge's measures skirted constitutional limits and executive power. And investigative journalists pointed to contracts awarded without competitive bidding, raising concerns about cronyism and conflicts of interest. Musk, for his part, seemed unfazed by the backlash. He compared Doge to a philosophy rather than a standard government program, saying it could persist beyond its formal lifespan, even likening it to Buddhism in interviews, which raised questions about whether that was a compliment, a metaphor, or just Musk being Musk. Whether Doge was a bold strike against government waste or an ill-conceived political stunt depends largely on one's point of view, but it undeniably left a mark. It was Musk's first direct foray into the day-to-day operations of government, and it brought his trademark mix of speed, disruption, and headline-generating controversy into a world that usually runs on slow consensus. And if nothing else, it proved one thing. When Musk steps into politics, he does it the same way he launches rockets. Fast, loud, and with the very real possibility of either breaking records or blowing up on the pad. By now, Elon Musk's life reads less like a conventional biography and more like a serialized drama that refuses to end. It's a mix of improbable ventures, public missteps, and moments of pure spectacle, the kind that draw equal parts applause, criticism, and disbelief. In his own narrative, Musk is not merely a CEO or an inventor. He is a custodian of humanity's future. The stakes, as he presents them, are nothing less than survival. Whether it's through transitioning the world to sustainable energy, creating a multi-planetary civilization, or building AI systems that won't decide we're obsolete. And in this framing, every controversy, every outrageous deadline, every late night tweet is just noise compared to the mission. But the truth is more complicated. Musk's ambitions have undeniably accelerated industries, from electric vehicles to private spaceflight, in ways that governments and corporations had either failed to achieve or never seriously attempted. Tesla forced the auto industry to take electric mobility seriously. SpaceX reignited public excitement about space exploration, while simultaneously lowering launch costs. And yes, even his often dismissed ideas like reusable rockets or mass market EVs have gone from pipe dreams to industry standards in less than 2 decades. At the same time, Musk's presence in these stories is inescapably personal. He doesn't just lead companies, he brands them with his identity, for better or worse. This is why his supporters see him as a rare combination of visionary and operator, someone willing to risk personal wealth and reputation on projects that most investors would dismiss as impossible. It's also why his critics see him as a destabilizing force, a man whose impatience and unpredictability can threaten the very projects he champions. And then there's the contradiction at the heart of his vision. Musk dreams of leaving Earth, of building self-sustaining cities on Mars, of making humanity a multi-planetary species. But for all his talk about the stars, he remains deeply entangled in Earth's own mess, from regulatory battles over satellites and rockets, to political arguments on social media, to public debates over the future of energy. Musk's gaze may drift to other planets, but his feet remain firmly in the mud of this one. It's tempting to imagine that when Musk eventually steps away, whether into retirement, into a Martian colony, or into the next improbable industry, his legacy will be neatly summed up by his technological achievements. But that would be an oversimplification. His story is as much about the how as the what, about relentless ambition, about pushing boundaries even when, especially when, the result is messy. Perhaps the most fitting way to think about Musk is not as a destination, but as a vector. Always in motion, never entirely predictable, shaped by the forces around him, but also bending those forces in unexpected ways. Like one of his Falcon rockets, sometimes he soars, sometimes he explodes. But even in failure, the trajectory points somewhere few have dared to aim. And if the point of all this was simply to leave Earth, maybe he could have done so already. But Musk seems to understand, or perhaps can't escape, the fact that his real influence lies here, in the unpredictable, contradictory, and deeply human world he's been both trying to improve and trying to outgrow. The man who wants to leave Earth is also the man who, in ways large and small, keeps ensuring that Earth can't quite let go of him.